Lately, it seems every passing second brings news of another climate-driven disaster. But we still have the power to turn back the clock. Harnessing the power of collective human energy, today's university students are working together to chart a new future, demanding and creating the solutions for a sustainable climate. Our focus in science, engineering, activism, and politics offers the potential of a better tomorrow for all of us. Tune in to Campus Climate Corps for news of what is and what is not happening at this year's UN Climate Conference. Prepare for a livable tomorrow with a life and career of action. Join us and become part of the solution.
Good evening, everyone. Here from Sharm el Sheikh, Egypt. I'm here in for Rock Abu Jaudi because, well, as you all well know, there is a new hurricane affecting Florida, and right now the connection in Gainesville is particularly bad. He may join us later on, but in the meantime, we'll begin from here. Today we have Michael Fiedler, we have Valholly Frank, and we have John Capece, also here from the COP27 venue. And the first thing we have for you today is an interview with a member of the Senegalese delegation. And as you already know, the issue of loss and damage has been a protagonist of COP27 thus far. Michael, can we put the video on? Very well, take a listen.
We're here today with Madeleine Diop, part of the Senegalese delegation to COP27. Hello, how do you do?
Hi, how are you?
We wanted to ask you, as part of the Senegalese delegation, what are your prime objectives for this COP27?
For this COP27, we look for adaptation finance. We facing climate impact, and we need really to adapt our economy. So we look for adaptation finance. We also are looking for loss and damage finance to be established, because also it's a key pillar for this project. We all also having our coastal zone being totally destroyed. We have also drought regularly, so destroying many houses. So we're looking really some action around that.
And what do you think are the prime challenges in accomplishing your objectives at COP27? What are the main points of resistance?
You know, when we start talking about finance, it's always difficult because we're looking for public finance to be available for developing countries, LDC countries, small island countries. And there's a lot of resistance to have public finance in order to help us to adjust our development to climate change. And actually, what we I think there's a good reason, but maybe the context, the geopolitical context, doesn't allow maybe. But I think something are coming, because adaptation as well and developed partners also are really respond to their messages.
In view of these challenges, does Senegal work in tandem with other African countries to advocate for this?
Yeah.
Michael, I think we've lost sound.
Not increase with them of African countries, and this is
Any more message, anything else you would like to add as part of the core message of the Senegalese delegation?
Yes, we're looking really for having a great outcome in Egypt, in Senegal, in Africa, and we're sure that with the leadership of Egypt, we'll get there.
Thank you very much.
And that was Madeleine Dufs from the Senegalese delegation. The first question I wanted to pose to our team here is how does this interview tie with what you've heard about loss and damage thus far in COP27?
Oh, well, loss and damage, of course, is a primary issue here, but it almost seems like it's becoming a dominant theme rather than mitigation. And we've touched on that before, and it's somewhat unfortunate. It would seem that, as we discussed the other day, that all you have to do is assign a percentage, 10%, 20%, whatever your nation is spending on the climate issue, 10% goes to these other nations. But we have to make sure that that aggregate number on developing the solutions dominates and is of sufficient scale. Arguing over loss and damage at this point, before we've even charted a path for survival of any people on this planet, seems a little misguided.
Valholly?
Yeah, I definitely gotta agree with John. And it is interesting. It's sort of similar the way that's a main focus. Like it's a really big topic, and I haven't seen it in like a lot of other of all the other content I've seen. It's mainly just adaptation and loss and damage. And it's so strange. I was talking to Lainey yesterday, and no matter who I talk to, we can't figure out when the switch happened from talking about mitigation to talking about adaptation, and why it seems like so many things here, it's either one or the other. Like there can't be like a combined solution, as if climate change just has one answer and that's like the one thing we have to focus on. But loss and damage overall, especially from what I've been to, all the meetings and pavilion events that I've attended, it's just the same old stuff said. It's never really anything new. It's just like, hey, we need help, we need this, we need that. And like, you hear it everywhere.
Thank you for that. We will continue to interview as many delegations as we can. Usually having access to them, it's a bit difficult. But from time to time, they happen to be still available at their own pavilions, and probably we can get more delegations just to ask questions and have more perspectives on loss and damage from countries from the third world. In the meantime, this was Science Day, and today it was Science and Youth Day were combined. I had a really hard time finding science talks in particular, because the application of COP27 didn't work very well, and it happened that it didn't show where the locations of these talks were. In my case, I was most of the time concentrated on the talk given by Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, on the Resilience Hub, and we'll have more material on that particular conference on the upcoming days. But John, you were able to access some talks?
Yeah, I made the rounds as best I could. You know, there's always challenges with logistics here, but you know, I want to first go back to Rock and the fact that he's not able to connect to us. And I think this is another good example of how the onset of the climate crisis will gradually diminish our capacity to deal with the climate crisis. So we have a very limited window of opportunity to put the solutions on track for implementation and to achieve the necessary results. I mean, if we don't do that, then we're all of a sudden going to find ourselves with no ability, no industrial capacity, no governance capacity, no organizational capacity to tackle this issue. So the window of opportunity is rapidly closing. And Rock's experience with the hurricane and the power outage is just an example of that. But I'm here in the Qatar, and there's a little bit of a ruckus going on behind us, but hopefully you can hear me okay. You know, it seems to me that, as we were pointing out, the solution scientists are few and far between here. Even when you do find a science presentation, it's on a topic that a category I generally classify as documenting the decline. Basically, a bunch of scientists measuring how bad it's getting, how quickly, what's dying, at what rate, how many things we've lost, when we're going to lose the next one, how bad the floods are going to get, by when. And, you know, it's basically not solutions oriented. It's simply documenting the decline. And often what you find is politically, even within universities, they do not want you working on solutions and asserting these solutions. They want you working on things you can publish and not create controversy within the state legislature that is likely to fund the department. And so we have a lot of conflicts of interest, and I'll touch on some of the university aspects further on. So a lot of the solution scientists aren't here, but some are. I would say that perhaps the best pavilion for getting an appreciation of technology is the Japan pavilion. Last year, I went into the Japan pavilion. I was impressed because they had static displays of some high-tech devices and systems. But in addition to these displays, they had an expert standing right next to it. And you could talk with them at length. These were full professors. These were department chairs. These were some serious scientists and engineers. So I enjoyed that very much last year. I came back this year, and there's twice as many of them. You know, whereas last year there were like 5 of them. There's got to be 10 of them this year. So they've really stepped up. Japan has in displaying the solutions-oriented technologies in science that we need to see more of. So I'm looking forward to spending more time at that pavilion. I went over to the Kuwait pavilion, and they were doing a session on carbon sequestration. Basically, the concept that you can continue to extract fossil fuels, burn them, but immediately capture the CO2 and inject it back into the ground, or undertake some other sequestration procedure to fix that carbon and prevent it from entering the atmosphere. So that's a logical sort of science presentation from a nation like Kuwait. It'll be interesting to see how the technologies evolve and at what price point. In other words, if solar and wind and other renewable technologies drives the cost down of energy to where fossil fuel-based energies, combined with their, say, 20% load of carbon sequestration, in other words, 20% of the energy you extract from burning the fossil fuels is consumed in sequestering the carbon. If the 80% remaining power is going to be sufficient to support the economics of the fossil fuel industry. So it'll be interesting to learn more about that in this COP and in general. I then went over to the Cryosphere Pavilion. Cryosphere is the pavilion that focuses on our polar regions, the Arctic, the Antarctic, sea ice, glaciers, etc. And they had a panel that combined the two themes of the day. Today is the Science Day, today is the Youth Day. So they had youth, young scientists talking about science. And that was creative and quite useful, I thought. Again, this is documenting the decline type science, but these were earnest, solid researchers. And the moderator of the session took the opportunity at the end to ask them a question. If you had unlimited resources, what would you do with it? Well, three of the four scientists talked about all the instrumentation and different projects that they would initiate to further the type of science they engage in. One fellow, however, said, I use it to force the capitalistic system to transform itself and get into compliance with becoming part of the solution. So he was something of a rebel, even though he was a solid scientist. So he was one of the few that understood that science is not necessarily the limiting factor in our solutions. We could solve the problem right now if we took the available science and applied it, but economics and the politics that follow from economics have not permitted that thus far. I then went to a presentation that just about made my head spin. It was on cryptocurrencies. It was about blockchain. And they were talking about how blockchain could potentially contribute to climate change solutions. And I don't think I heard an actual solution in there anywhere. Just a lot of talk and a lot of spin. And the panel was made up of what looked like some newly minted millionaires who had fallen into some serious cash. But cryptocurrency and blockchain, I think, is useful in that it demonstrates the direct connection between energy and wealth in society and human civilization. As we are able to exploit greater and greater amounts of energy, we are able to advance and become wealthier as a species, wealthier relative to consumer items, not necessarily to other values. But they did their best, and again, the cryptocurrencies demonstrate that energy directly leads to wealth. It's a little more convoluted and indirect in the rest of the economy, but in cryptocurrency, it's very direct. You put energy, vast amounts of energy into computers, and money comes out the other end. So that's an important point to make. I then went over to another pavilion where they had a talk on excuse me, artificial intelligence and remote sensing. And these students or young professionals were discussing their activities. But what I found most interesting was a new assistant professor. I talked to her afterward and asked if the universities were changing to allow assistant professors to gain tenure in academic promotions based upon applied research, much of which is climate change research is going to consist of. And she said that this was a concern among many young PhDs, and it'll be interesting to see how that manifests itself in university governance in the coming years. I have to excuse me, I've got something of a cold and fighting off.
No problem. That's actually my field of research, AI and remote sensing, just that I applied for marine mammal monitoring. Valholly, you also went to a particular talk about AI and remote sensing, and I wonder if it was the same or not.
It wasn't the same talk. Hopefully you can hear me well if somebody is speaking now. I actually attended a talk that was held by Al Gore, and it was with a group called Climate Trace, and it was all about accurately tracing emissions through satellite imagery and AI, and it was more of that, like, here's how bad things are getting. He started off the entire talk with, like, listen to all of these terrible recent events, which seems typical in fashion here. But the actual site is very accessible, climatetrace.org, and it's very interesting data, and they're working with different governments to actually get accurate numbers on their emissions, especially because of, like, what we've been talking about, greenwashing and just fossil fuel companies blatantly fudging the numbers of their emissions. And then I later on attended a talk from NASA about more satellite use, and that was more so about how the Earth's surface is actually being affected from climate change. So again, like John was saying, there aren't many talks of solutions here. A lot of just like everything is really terrible. And I was talking to someone the other day and they mentioned that they used to read about COP and they'd read at the end of the 2 weeks about how little happened. But now that they're here, it's finally setting in how little happens, you know? And it's definitely a bore at times. But the one interesting thing that I have actually been able to hear about is the initiatives relating to the International Climate Justice Organization, the UN organization. And that's been amazing. And later on, I'll be able to talk about that and talk a little bit about what was actually happening on this named Youth Day. And like you were saying, that it was Science and Youth Day, but there wasn't much science happening. There wasn't much relating to the youth that I saw, especially compared to yesterday being Finance Day and so much of it being finance related. So I assume that they're just going to be days where they just needed a name for it, you know?
Well, I would say there's may not be a lot happening, but there's a lot going on. I mean, people are running around all over the place. There's, vast numbers of people, huge expanses of all these pavilions, lots of people talking. So the central negotiations don't seem like the productivity side of this conference. The interactions and perhaps the solutions that those might spark might be the real value of these conferences. Have to see.
One of the points that rather stuck in my mind as I was previewing the topics for this particular conference is that, yeah, Solutions Day is at the very end. We'll have to wait for that, but at this point, given the urgency of the matter and the amount of information already published, I mean, the APCC came back various weeks ago. Perhaps it would have been better to put Solution Day at the beginning and kind of lay the groundwork for discussions in the convention from that standpoint. But again, and probably it would have been better to give it more than one day of topics for solutions. But again, what we see is, in a way, a logical order in the sense that solutions come at the end, but at the end there is also less space for that information to take root within the people in the conference and create some degree of synergy, perhaps in the negotiations, or at least in our interactions as part of the conference. The other point that I wanted to make is, indeed, the Japanese pavilion does focus on solutions. We are trying to get actually an interview for the briefings on the content of the Japanese pavilion, but if not, we'll be sure to at least visit it and take photographs and document, take notes, so that we can showcase the amount of possible technological solutions available for the public, which is considerable. As you say, it has only grown.
I took a video in the Japan pavilion, and it was interesting because I panned from the audience area where somebody was delivering a presentation across the reception and then into the area where they had the static displays. And every time I went to video, the expert would stand out of the way so I could film their exhibit. And then I stopped my video and I said, no, my purpose here is to show how you are standing in front of this display, you an expert. And then they understood, and they all stood there while I did my video.
That'll be wonderful to include in our content overall about the Japanese pavilion, which will be sure to visit again and again.
And also, in the cryosphere, I told you about that one rebel. I'm going to try to see if we can have an interview with him tomorrow and hear what he has to say in more detail.
Yes, and in that way we'll fill up content of youth that perhaps was not as covered as we would have liked within the actual conference. One of the next points that talking about science is we have an interview with a student from Cornell, and we'll be following up with more material. But for today, we have a short interview with one of Cornell's students, showcasing her work here at COP27, and who was part of a course that allowed her to include recommendation to build along with her classmates recommendations for delegations. Michael, do we have this video? Take a listen.
We're here with Katherine Cornett, a Cornell student that is showcasing her research at COP27. Hi, how's it going?
It's going well so far.
So can you tell us a little bit about the research you're showcasing here at COP?
Sure. So this semester I'm enrolled in a course in the Engineering and Agriculture School at Cornell that focuses on the COP and IPCC reports, and then just more broadly, global climate science and climate policy. And every student is assigned a group project to work on. And so I've had the pleasure of assessing and giving recommendations for fixing coastal vulnerability in the Kingdom of Congo.
Wonderful, congratulations.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about how the curricula at Cornell includes climate change and ties in the overall framework of your research?
Sure. So this wasn't implemented when I came in. I'm a senior, but I believe freshmen now and in the future are required to take a course on climate change at some point in their Cornell career, which I think is just a huge step, because when I came in as a freshman, I thought that every student should have to be learning about climate change because it's so prevalent in everyone's lives today and it's such a big discussion. And I think it's really great to be
Wonderful. And can you tell us a little bit about what efforts are being done at Cornell in terms of cutting emissions on campus?
Sure. So right now, Cornell uses lake source cooling to cool the university in the summer, and that's been very successful thus far. And then this August, we drilled a 2-mile deep hole just off campus to research and hopefully implement earth source heating to help lower emissions. This is all part of Cornell's 2030 carbon neutral plan for the campus.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us.
So in that sense, I think that the options that Cornell is offering and the degree of the point at which some courses are mandatory is again something to celebrate, and that you don't see in every institution of higher education. So, Valholly, John, anything you would in particular would like to see in institutions of higher education to prepare the youth for a career in climate, which is ultimately the point, the objective up to some point of Campus Climate Corps?
Well, I think that it's important to have an introduction to climate change and some of the science, but most students are not climate change scientists or working directly in those fields. But it's important context if you're an engineer or any other type of scientist. Even if you're a business major, even if you're an educator or a sociologist, every discipline has a role to play in this solution if there is going to be a solution. So everyone has to be aware. So part of it needs to be on the climate science. Part of it needs to be on how you as an educator, how you as a business major, how you as, any other discipline, as an English major, how can you contribute to the solution? And then also sort of a reorientation. Our entire lives growing up, we're immersed in this economy that moves around and values everything by dollars and cents. It's important, I think, that all students be exposed to ecological economics and a different perspective on what's valuable and what's not, what the value is in the various objects, the products and services that we use and produce. So an introductory course needs to have multiple elements, not just climate science. It needs to touch on climate science, it needs to touch on the application of every discipline, it needs to touch on ecological economics.
Valholly, any comments?
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of when I was in high school and when I took a very basic environmental science course. And I remember sitting in it, of course, because of my history of being like in activism and all of that, I knew a lot of the substance that was being taught, but it was so surprising to me how little some of the other students knew, especially the students who were also in like that same teacher's business classes. So of course it's all connected and there's so much learning to be done. But if I may, I'd just like to talk a little bit about that ICJ stuff that I have been attending. And let me correct myself from earlier, ICJ, the International Court of Justice. There is an initiative started out of Vanuatu, and it began in, I believe, 2018. It was a group of students who came up with the idea to, similarly like the case that I was on in the United States and the cases that are happening in the United States, to bring climate into the legal world and to prove that it is a human right to be protected from climate change and its impacts. And I've been attending these different talks about what Vanuatu is doing, and it's a very impressive initiative in my mind, and it's focused on like the Pacific island people and mainly the global south. And I attended a panel today, and there was actually young woman 25 from Uganda, and she gave an amazing talk. And while, again, there aren't many solutions associated with it, it's more of just a ask to get clarification on international law, and basically just prove that climate change needs to be less of a debate and it needs to just be something that we act on because we need to protect everyone from what is happening and the effects of it. So there's no big action that will come out of this except for getting us at a baseline for these conferences and for further UN activities. But sadly, that is necessary at these events. And she gave this beautiful talk about what's happening in her country, the global south, and all of these panelists brought up how race interacts with climate change and how marginalized communities, while they're on the front lines, they're never on the front page of these issues. And what was interesting to me was, especially if anybody who saw our talk about koi or my talk about koi, I was very pessimistic and talked about how I wasn't very hopeful. But she still had hope, and she still had a few messages that rang with a hopeful tone, which was honestly impressive to see after a very upsetting talk. And there's something very loud happening behind me, so I hope I sound all right. And I just wanted to talk about a little bit about that initiative, and I would love to be able to share what they're doing there. And it's definitely just making the states aware of these issues and making sure there's accountability for what is happening. But naming of like what fossil fuel companies must do if this is passed. But nothing would be done if they were named directly or if there was any attack on them, especially because of their presence here. Um, so it's very surface level and sort of reminiscent of the petition for rulemaking that's happening in Florida right now. It seems like hey, yeah, we've got to do something about climate change, but who's going to hold these people accountable if this rule is passed, you know? Um, and aside from the legal aspects of that and climate change, overall, that's been interesting to hear about. The science has been interesting to hear about. But what's disappointing is the Indigenous presence here, especially from the Indigenous pavilion, because each talk I go into, it's all very surface level. And it's always, we're doing our part and we need more Indigenous representation. We need this and this and that. And like, nothing is being said, and each talk is exactly the same. But there were a few panel discussions on research in South America and Central America, and the $1.7 billion pledge that was agreed upon in Glasgow. And they were talking about how only 19% of those funds have been allocated, but only 7% have reached the actual Indigenous communities directly. So they were talking about how there needs to be no more intermediary people in this process, how the funds need to go directly into it. And I know that is a very tough topic, talking directly about like reparations and funds going directly to these places, but they were discussing how people will often set up projects in these communities, and it will help for the time being while the project is like actually being cared for. But once the funds dry out, all of that progress stops. And once the people who are managing these projects leave, the communities themselves don't have the tools to continue what was started. They don't have the funds, they don't have the ability, they don't have the capabilities. So a lot of talk about, so there was actual talk about what needs to be done in those communities and what they want to get out of COP. So that was refreshing because a lot. Again, the talks have been about how.
I think we lost you for a second in terms.
Yeah.
Valholly, what you described there as far as when the funds dry up and the external organizers depart, the project sort of grind to a halt. That's a traditional pitfall with any and all development projects that happen in developing economies, developing nations, and it's a very significant challenge. Typically, the way to better address that is make sure a significant portion of the project is dedicated to human resource development. For example, when our organization did village water projects in Central Asia, we would do these projects and we would find that, yes, after we left, things kind of fell apart. But what we also found was that the people that we trained, the students that we had working on these in that country, they went on to careers in that area. And basically our one attempted project led to this individual doing 20, 30 years of similar projects throughout the world. So sometimes it can be a little deceptive. You see a failure, but you have to look at the human resource development and see if that is in fact paying dividends, because very often that will be the true value of the project.
Speaking of which, we have a question in part intersecting all of these issues. This comes from Rhonda, and she's saying, thinking finance and science and solutions. Do you think solutions have to be profitable, marketable to be implemented? So I have my own opinion about that, but I can let the rest of the speakers go first, and I can close.
Well, that's sort of the crux of ecological economics. It defines profitable differently. The return on investment is not the dollars. The return on investment is the carbon savings, and we have to figure out mechanisms to redirect the dollars to follow that other value model.
Sorry, my connection is a
Well,
bit slow.
Okay. Well, I'd like to hear your thoughts, Esteban, and how.
So mine is a resounding no. Essentially, yes, sure. There can be some solutions that are profitable and marketable and good for those. They can be fostered, especially because the private sector can take over and probably amplify the effect. But it's not the case that most solutions have to be profitable. The way I see it, we have to deal with this crisis as we've dealt with other pollution crises. And essentially, you do that by implementing solutions that are not classically profitable. They are profitable in other ways, but not classically. And those solutions are implemented by the state, or they are imposed on the private sector as rules, as laws. Essentially, the same way that you treat industrial waste, well, chemical waste. Yeah, it should be the same way for carbon itself. So some solutions may be profitable, some don't, but not all have to be profitable. Valholly, what do you think?
I think depending on where you are, like the United States, I feel like almost everything has to be profitable for anything to happen. But even then, it's a toss-up. Like, for example, Al Gore was talking about how renewable energy sources back just 10, 20, 30 years ago, it wasn't cost effective to replace fossil fuels with those sources. But pretty soon, it will be more cost effective to have renewable energy than fossil fuels. And even then, we're not seeing a big change to these sources. And I wish, of course, as I'm sure everyone with a brain or a heart agrees, things didn't have to be profitable to save people and save the planet. But just from what I see, and I'd love to hear that rebel scientist take on this, I think it'll have to be profitable. And if not, it'll have to be a miracle.
That's a good quote.
We'll be sure to have that rebel here on as a speaker. Hold on to that contact, John. In the meantime, Michael, you have some material for us today?
Yes, I have a sort of set of photos. So if you allow me, I would take the floor and I'll share my today's set of photos.
I allow you.
Okay, I'm clicking the share button then, and now you should see the first photo. If you see, that would be the demonstration. I was, well, not just me, but all of us at COP were welcomed by. It was a pretty small demonstration. Well, here you can see the size. It was probably 20 protesters and maybe 50 people max standing by and just watching and taking photos. The thing is, well, the slogans were similar to what I have heard in Madrid and Glasgow and elsewhere, meaning what do we want? Climate justice. When do we want? Now, except that the crowd was 20 people, not 20,000 like in Madrid. So here just one more shot of the scale of the demonstration, and the activists were giving out these books or brochures, and they were also using the abbreviation AO. So first I thought they were just using a rhyming. What do we want? AO, climate justice. But obviously, then I realized what's the abbreviation. What's the abbreviation for? I walked through some of the pavilions. It's COP is at a full swing. There are thousands of people walking by, joining various presentations, taking interviews just like us. So here would be just a little advice how to do a good interview, setting it up this way. But then I moved to the room where the House of Representatives speaker Nancy Pelosi was delivering one of the discussion. She was joining one of the discussion. It took place in the Resilience Pavilion or in the Resilience Hub. And what surprised me the most was that such an important person had her presentation hosted in such a small room. So in this hub, where hardly 50 people could fit in, that's where the presentation took place. So people were trying to get in as possible ways as they could. There was some creative ways. So this is just behind the door, photo being taken. So I asked the security guy, and he allowed me to take a photo this way as well. So then I walked around, found a window where I could have a peek in, and this is the size of the room where the workshop took place. By the way, the theme or the topic was, let me quote, discuss how the US and allies can bolster climate action and change the trajectory of global warming. So I would probably recommend to change the trajectory of where the event takes place. So hopefully they saw the same thing and realized that this was not really the place. There were so many security guys around, keeping everybody away from Nancy Pelosi. But eventually I got few shots of her as well, especially after she walked out and was giving few interviews. So I did not manage to get an interview with her. I hardly managed to get a photo like that, but at least I'm happy with this photo after all. Then after the Pelosi speech was done, I walked around and another woman caught my attention, which would be this lady. It was mostly her dress, because she in some sense looked like Angel, and then she had the social justice and climate justice signs all over of her. So I took few photos of her. Then we struck a conversation and ended up in a real photo shoot. So most likely I'm not joining you for the stream tomorrow night. I might be busy doing other things. So moving on, I walked back to the youth pavilion, met this representatives. I think they were from Vanuatu or Fiji, and they were also delivering their speeches, recording some interviews. Was just surprised that the director or the editor was telling them what to say and what not to say. It was a bit surprising. So it didn't seem like they could say whatever they wanted to say. There was some editing needed. And finally, I end up in the youth pavilion, which there were plenty of performances, and the people were having various symbols. Here you can see the sign of no gas in their palms, and well, that's the same person was just doing a little performance there. But the pavilion was full of various discussions, and I was surprised how many young people were there today. It was here again full of symbols, people just putting signs on their computers. And then I attended an award ceremony, which was called Celebrating Young Green Changemakers Addressing Environmental Challenges. The prizes were awarded by the IKEA Foundation. So this would be the director or CEO of the IKEA Foundation. And this would be a shot of the group of young green change makers who won the first prize. So they were really very happy. That was a lot of positive energy there. And this would be my last image for the day, because the pavilion is not just called youth, but it's also youth and children pavilion. So there was this little, I'm guessing this girl is from Kenya, so probably the youngest attendee of COP this year. And with this being said, I'm turning it back to you.
Thank you, Michael. Awesome photos.
I'd like to point out that at that Pelosi event, alongside her were two other representatives. I think one was Betty Castor. I think the other one was Bonamici from Oregon. And there's about 7 or 8 members of Congress here at COP. And after they exited, I spoke to Representative Castor. And Representative Castor is the chair of the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis. So we've requested an interview with her, and we'll see if that materializes. Her aide said that they'd sent us an email inviting us to conduct that interview tomorrow evening.
We'll see about that. That would be very, very interesting indeed. Moving on, we don't have much time left. I wanted to showcase one last talk that I attended, and this was yesterday. I don't know if now, oh yeah, Michael allowed me to share the screen.
Yes, you are allowed now.
This particular talk, can you all see this?
Yes, we see fine.
Perfect. So this particular talk was on measuring emissions from an armed conflict, from Russia's invasion of Ukraine on the first 7 months. And it is indeed an unusual achievement to actually get an estimation of emissions during armed conflicts. This was presented by, this was performed by several Ukrainian and international scientists, and they divided the estimation into different items. They first went through what they called environmental damage, and this went through forest destruction, to loss of wildlife too. And they also actually included damage to soil. They gave an estimate in billion of euros of the environmental damage caused by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. They also calculated that 20% of protected areas in Ukraine have become jeopardized because of the invasion. And just to start giving you some more numbers, then they went on to some details on the nuclear radiation threats, and if something, as we discussed the other day with John, if something has become clear is that now in warfare, Russia has made clear that essentially nuclear plants can be targets, and indeed, because of them being targets, there are again radiation dangers. This is essentially the panel. This was the scientist that actually presented these numbers, and in terms of particular figures and contributions to the estimate, they also took into account the amount of bombs. We have more than 200,000 explosive devices and more than 2,000 aircraft bombs, and also the presence of phosphorus shells used by Russia, which are actually banned by international law. And we have to keep in mind that this is for the first 7 months of hostilities. The problem continues. They quantify damage to forests. They calculate that 450,000 hectares of forest have become occupied or are in the hostility zones. But in particular, well, there has been some progress in liberating millions of hectares of forest from the invasion. And the other points that they quantified were protected ecosystems that have become effective or under threat of destruction. This includes even Ramsar sites and protected areas of Ukraine. So when it comes to actually set components for the estimation of emissions due to the war, one of the pillars is refugees, and also displacement of people internally in Ukraine. So they calculated that we have at least 1.4 million tons of CO2 because of the displacement, because of the sheer transportation of refugees and people internally in Ukraine. But actually, one of the most important points is reconstruction. An enormous amount of civilian infrastructure has been destroyed. So essentially, and this is actually the factor that is the greatest. It's expected to, that the reconstruction process will mean the emission of 48 million tons of CO2. This goes over other factors. For example, fires were quantified in 23 million tons of CO2, and the military operations themselves, like troop movement, military aircraft, and explosives, have been quantified in 8 million tons of CO2. However, in terms of infrastructure, they also emphasize that this is an opportunity to rebuild greener. And again, this particular research serves as a calling for international accounting framework for emissions, which is definitely something that we've seen on and on in our discussions during the debriefs. So this is essentially the summary of emissions. We have the 48 million tons for reconstruction, 23 from fires, 1.4 for the movement of refugees, and 8.9 from the actual military warfare. Here is a pie chart of the distribution of these emissions, and that also included the leakage of the Nord Stream pipeline 1 and 2. And again, they emphasize the need for a global accounting framework, essentially to attribute correctly the emissions caused and directly or indirectly by military action, and also to quantify the emissions that will be caused to remediate and rebuild infrastructure. They also have some points to share in terms of how to account for emissions of the occupied territories. They said that Russia is already including emissions from the occupied territories as their own, and they insist no, that those emissions are still Ukrainian. So overall, a very interesting presentation, a very unusual estimation, one that it's not found so easily. But with that, it's 8 p.m. Cairo time. It's 1 p.m. Florida time, Eastern Coast of the U.S. Just some final reflections to close. Current Hurricane Nicole has broken records. It's in nearly four decades. The first in 4 decades, it's nearly 4 decades, the first hurricane that makes landfall in November in the States, and due to the consequences of climate change, we could expect more of them in the future. Please stay safe, everyone. We hope that the effects of Hurricane Nicole are not that severe in your area. Any final remarks from the speakers?
Looking forward to those interviews tomorrow with the student and members of the House of Representatives.
Indeed, we are. Thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Lately, it seems every passing second brings news of another climate-driven disaster. But we still have the power to turn back the clock. Harnessing the power of collective human energy, today's university students are working together to chart a new future, demanding and creating the solutions for a sustainable climate. Our focus in science, engineering, activism, and politics offers the potential of a better tomorrow for all of us. Tune in to Campus Climate Corps for news of what is and what is not happening at this year's UN Climate Conference. Prepare for a livable tomorrow with a life and career of action. Join us and become part of the solution.